Hello and welcome. Tonight, we step gently into one of the most enchanting fairy tales ever told. There's nothing you need to do right now. Just settle in, breathe a little slower, and let the day drift away. If this space brings you comfort, you're always welcome to stay by liking the video or subscribing, but only if it truly feels right to you. I love knowing where these stories travel, so if you wish, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time the night has reached for you. Now lower the lights, let a soft sound fill the room, and allow yourself to be carried slowly, calmly into tonight's story. The Grave-Mound. A rich farmer once stood in his yard, his hands folded behind his back, slowly turning his eyes from one side to the other, as if he wished to take full possession of all that lay before him merely by looking. His fields stretched wide and orderly, and the corn rose from the earth thick and strong, promising a harvest more abundant than any he could remember. The fruit trees bent beneath their own weight. Apples and pears shone through the leaves, and branches creaked softly under their burden. Nothing was stunted, nothing neglected. Everywhere there was increase. He went on step by step into the barns where the grain of the previous year still lay piled in immense heaps. So great was the quantity that the rafters groaned beneath it, and one might have thought the beams themselves would give way under such prosperity. From there he passed into the stable. The oxen were broad-backed and well-fed. The cows stood sleek and heavy with milk, and the horses gleamed as if their hides had been polished like glass. The smell of fodder, warmth, and abundance filled the air. At last he returned to his sitting room, where he opened the iron chest that held his money, and cast a lingering glance inside. Gold and silver lay there in ordered stacks. Cold, heavy, and obedient, the farmer drew a deep breath. All this was his. No storm, no thief, no misfortune had yet touched him. He believed himself secure. Yet while he stood there surveying his riches, something happened which he had neither planned nor expected. A loud knock sounded suddenly close by him. It was not at the door of the room, nor at the window, nor at the chest of iron. It was as if the sound had risen from within himself. The knock was at the door of his heart. That door opened, and a voice spoke to him, not loudly, but with a force that could not be resisted. "Hast thou done good to thy family with it?" asked the voice. "Hast thou considered the necessities of the poor? Hast thou shared thy bread with the hungry? Hast thou been contented with what thou hast, or didst thou always desire to have more?" The farmer stood motionless. He could not turn away, and he could not pretend that he had not heard. The questions sank into him one by one like stones into deep water. And the heart, which had been so long silent, answered without delay and without mercy. "I have been hard and pitiless," it said. "I have shown no kindness even to my own family. If a beggar came to my door, I turned my eyes away from him. I troubled myself little about God and thought only of increasing my wealth. If everything which the sky covers had been mine, I should still not have had enough." When the farmer became aware of this answer, terror seized him. His knees trembled beneath him, his breath grew short, and the room seemed suddenly too small to contain him. He was forced to sit down, for his strength failed. Never before had he feared poverty, nor illness, nor death itself. Yet now he feared his own heart. Then there came another knock. This time it was at the door of the room. A poor man stood outside a neighbor who had many children and little bread. Hunger had driven him there. He hesitated before knocking, for he knew well the reputation of the rich farmer. He is as hard as he is rich, he thought. He does not readily give away anything that is his. Still, my children are crying for bread, and I can no longer endure their hunger. I will venture it. He entered and spoke plainly. You do not readily give, he said, yet I stand here like one who feels the water rising above his head. My children are starving. Lend me 4 measures of corn. The rich man looked at him for a long while. In that moment, something within him shifted. The words he had heard from his own heart were still echoing in his mind. Slowly, as ice melts under the first warmth of the sun, a single drop of mercy softened the hardness of his greed. I will not lend thee 4 measures, he said at last, but I will give thee 8 as a gift on one condition. The poor man was startled. What am I to do? He asked. When I am dead, said the rich man, thou shalt watch for 3 nights by my grave. The request disturbed the poor man deeply. To sit alone in the churchyard by night was no light matter, yet hunger is stronger than fear. He thought of his children, their thin faces and empty bowls. In his need, he would have agreed to anything. He accepted the condition and carried the corn home. It was as though the rich man had foreseen what was to come. 3 days later, without warning, he fell down dead. No one knew exactly how it happened. He had not been ill, nor had he spoken of pain. Yet no one truly mourned him. His wealth remained, but his presence was gone, and the village felt no poorer for his passing. When he was buried, the poor man remembered his promise. He would gladly have been released from it, yet he said to himself, he acted kindly toward me. I fed my children with his corn. Even if that were not so, a promise once given must be kept. At nightfall, he went into the churchyard and seated himself upon the grave-mound. All was quiet. The moon rose slowly above the stones, and an owl flew past now and then, uttering its melancholy cry. The air was cold, and the silence pressed upon him, yet nothing happened. When the sun rose, he returned safely to his home. The second night passed in the same manner, still silent and empty of terror. But on the third evening, a strange uneasiness overcame him. It seemed to him that something was about to happen, though he could not say what. As he approached the churchyard wall, he saw a man standing there whom he had never seen before. He was no longer young. Scars marked his face, and his eyes looked sharply and eagerly about. He wore an old cloak, and nothing was visible but his great riding boots. "What are you looking for here?" asked the peasant. "Are you not afraid of the lonely churchyard?" "I am afraid of nothing," answered the stranger, "and I am looking for nothing. I am a paid-off soldier, and I mean to pass the night here, for I have no other shelter." "If you are without fear," said the peasant, "stay with me and help me to watch that grave." "To keep watch is a soldier's business," replied the man. "Whatever we meet here, whether good or bad, we will share it between us." They sat down together upon the grave, and the night deepened around them. They sat upon the grave-mound in silence. The moon had climbed higher, and its pale light lay evenly over the churchyard, touching the stones and the low grass without warmth. For a long while, neither man spoke. The peasant listened to the beating of his own heart, while the soldier leaned forward, resting his elbows upon his knees as one accustomed to waiting. Midnight had scarcely passed when a sharp whistling sound cut through the stillness of the air. It did not come from any living throat, nor did it resemble the cry of bird or beast. It seemed to glide through the night itself. At that sound, the earth before them stirred, and suddenly the evil one stood bodily before their eyes. He appeared in no uncertain shape. His form was plain enough, and there was no mistaking who he was. His eyes burned, his face was dark and threatening, and his presence filled the space around the grave with dread. "Be off, you ragamuffins," he cried. "The man who lies in that grave belongs to me. I have come to fetch him. If you do not go away at once, I will wring your necks." The peasant trembled, and fear seized him so strongly that he could scarcely draw breath. But the soldier rose calmly to his feet and looked the evil one straight in the face. "Sir with the red feather," said he, "you are not my captain. I have no need to obey you, and I have not yet learned how to fear. Go your way. We shall remain sitting here." The devil had not expected such an answer. He paused, and his eyes shifted from one watcher to the other. Then he thought to himself that there are few men who cannot be mastered by gold, and that money is often more powerful than threats. His voice grew smoother. "Why should we quarrel?" he said. "You are poor fellows wandering and without shelter. Take a bag of money, go home, and trouble yourselves no further with this matter." "That is worth listening to," replied the soldier, "but one bag will not serve us. If you will give us as much gold as will go into one of my boots, we will leave the field and trouble you no more." The devil frowned. "I have not so much with me," he said, "but I will fetch it. In the neighboring town lives a money changer who is a good friend of mine, and he will readily advance it." With that, he vanished as suddenly as he had appeared. The soldier laughed softly and took his left boot from his foot. "We shall soon pull the charcoal burner's nose for him," said he. "Just give me your knife." He cut the sole cleanly from the boot and laid it in the high grass near the grave, just at the edge of a hole, half hidden by weeds. Then he set the boot upright over it. "That will do," he said. "Now the chimney sweep may come." They waited. It was not long before the devil returned, carrying a small bag of gold. He poured it into the boot as the soldier lifted it slightly. "That will not be enough," said the soldier. The devil shook out all that was in the bag. The gold fell through the boot and disappeared into the hole, and the boot remained empty. "Stupid devil," cried the soldier, "it will not do. Did I not tell you so at once? Go back and bring more." The evil one shook his head, but he went. After an hour he returned with a larger bag and poured its contents into the boot. Again the gold clinked and vanished, and the boot was no fuller than before. The devil bent down and looked into it with his burning eyes. "You have shamefully big calves to your legs," he cried angrily. "Did you think," answered the soldier, "that I had a cloven foot like you? Since when have you been so stingy? Get more gold together, or our bargain comes to nothing." The devil went away once more. This time he stayed longer, and when he returned, he staggered beneath the weight of a great sack which he carried upon his shoulders. With fury, he emptied it into the boot. Still, the boot did not fill. At that sight, the devil lost all patience. He stretched out his hand to seize the boot from the soldier, but at that very moment, the first pale ray of the rising sun broke through the sky. A cry of rage and terror burst from him, and he fled away with loud shrieks, vanishing as darkness vanishes before the day. The peasant sank down upon the grave-mound, weak with relief. He had been saved, and he knew it. The danger was past, and the air itself seemed lighter now that the evil one was gone. When morning had fully come, they rose and uncovered the place where the gold had fallen. The peasant wished to divide it equally, but the soldier shook his head. "Give what falls to my share to the poor," said he. "I ask no more than that. Come with me to thy cottage, and together we will live in rest and peace on what remains as long as God is pleased to permit." And so they did. The star money. There was once a little girl whose father and mother were dead, and she was so poor that she no longer had any little room to live in, nor even a bed to sleep in. At last, she had nothing left but the clothes she was wearing and a small piece of bread in her hand, which some charitable soul had given her out of pity. She was, however, good and pious, and her heart was gentle and trusting. And as she was thus forsaken by all the world with no one to guide or protect her, she went forth into the open country, trusting wholly in the good God and believing that He would not abandon her. As she walked along her lonely way, she met a poor man who looked faint and weary, and who said to her, "Ah, give me something to eat, for I am so hungry." Without hesitation, she reached him the whole of her piece of bread, although it was all she had, and said kindly, "May God bless it to thy use." Then she went onward, feeling the emptiness in her hand, but peace in her heart. Soon after this, she came upon a child who was shivering with cold and moaned, "My head is so cold, give me something to cover it with." The little girl took off her hood at once and placed it upon the child's head. She walked a little farther and met another child who had no jacket and was frozen by the sharp air. Without a word, she gave the child her own jacket, and when she had gone on a short distance more, another poor child begged her for a frock, and she gave away that also, though the cold grew stronger with every step she took. At length she came into a forest, and it had already become dark. The trees stood silent around her, and the night air was chill. Then there came yet another child, pale and trembling, who asked for a little shirt. The good little girl thought to herself, "It is a dark night, and no one sees thee. Thou canst very well give thy little shirt away." And she took it off and gave it away too, so that she stood there with not one single thing left. And as she thus stood alone in the darkness, suddenly the stars from heaven fell down around her. They were nothing else but hard, smooth pieces of shining money. And although she had just given her little shirt away, she found that she now wore a new one of the very finest linen. She gathered the money together into it, and from that hour she was rich all the days of her life. Hans in luck. Hans had served his master faithfully for 7 long years. During that time, he had risen early and gone to rest, late had worked in sun and rain, and had never spared his strength when there was work to be done. He was an honest fellow, simple in his ways, and content with little, and his master knew well that Hans had never once cheated him, nor spoken an untrue word. Therefore, when the 7 years were ended, Hans went to his master and said with a cheerful heart and without bitterness, "Master, my time is up. Now I should be glad to go back home to my mother. Give me my wages." The master answered kindly, "You have served me faithfully and honestly. As the service was so, shall the reward be." And with that he brought forth a great lump of gold as big as Hans's head, shining yellow and heavy, and gave it into his hands. Hans wrapped the lump carefully in his handkerchief, slung it upon his shoulder, and set out on the road that led homewards. As he went along, stepping briskly and singing to himself, he felt at first very proud and joyful. After 7 years of toil, he thought, "This is no small thing to carry. How pleased my mother will be when she sees it. We shall lack nothing now." Yet the longer he walked, the more he felt the weight of the gold pressing upon his shoulder. It weighed him down, so that his neck bent a little to one side, and from time to time he was forced to shift the burden, for it hurt him sorely. Still, he would not complain, but only said to himself, "Gold is heavy, that is true. But what of that? It is better to carry gold than to go empty-handed." He had not gone far when he heard the sound of hooves behind him, and presently a horseman trotted past on a lively horse. The rider sat upright and easy as though he were at rest, while the horse carried him swiftly over stones and uneven ground without effort. Hans stood still and looked after him with wonder, and then cried out aloud, "Ah, what a fine thing it is to ride! There you sit as on a chair. You stumble over no stones. You save your shoes and get on, you do not know how." The rider heard him, checked his horse, and turned back. "Hollo, Hans," he called, "why do you go on foot then?" "I must," answered Hans, "for I have this lump to carry home. It is true that it is gold, but I cannot hold my head straight for it, and it hurts my shoulder." "I will tell you what," said the rider, after a moment's thought. "We will exchange. I will give you my horse, and you can give me your lump of gold." "With all my heart," cried Hans at once, his face lighting up. "But I can tell you, you will have to crawl along with it." The rider laughed, got down from his horse, and took the gold, while Hans helped himself into the saddle with great delight. The rider put the bridle tight into Hans's hands and said, "If you want to go at a really good pace, you must click your tongue and call out, 'Choop, choop.'" Hans thanked him warmly and rode off, sitting high and feeling as though he were the happiest man alive. How light he felt now. The road seemed smooth, and the world looked bright before him. He laughed aloud for joy, thinking how cleverly he had managed his affair. "I must have been born under a lucky star," he said to himself. "Everything goes just as I wish." After a little while, he thought the horse ought to go faster still, and he began to click with his tongue and call out, "Joop, joop." The horse broke into a sharp trot, then into a gallop, and before Hans knew where he was thrown headlong and lay in a ditch by the side of the road. The horse would have gone off entirely if a countryman who was coming along and driving a cow before him had not caught the bridle and stopped it. Hans picked himself up slowly, for his limbs ached and his head swam. He was vexed and somewhat ashamed, and he said to the countryman, "It is a poor joke, this riding, especially when one gets hold of a mare like this that kicks and throws one off so that one has a chance of breaking one's neck. Never again will I mount it. Now I like your cow, for one can walk quietly behind her and have over and above one's milk, butter, and cheese every day without fail. What would I not give to have such a cow?" "Well," said the countryman, who was glad enough to get a horse, "if it would give you so much pleasure, I do not mind giving the cow for the horse." Hans agreed with the greatest delight. The countryman jumped upon the horse and rode quickly away, while Hans took the cow by the cord and drove her quietly before him. Now he went on his way contentedly, thinking over his lucky bargain. "If only I have a morsel of bread," thought he, "and that can hardly fail me. I can eat butter and cheese with it as often as I like. If I am thirsty, I can milk my cow and drink the milk. Good heart, what more can I want?" When he came to an inn, he made a halt, and in his great content ate up what he had with him, his dinner and his supper, and all he possessed. With his last few farthings, he bought half a glass of beer and drank it off cheerfully. Then he drove his cow onwards along the road that led to his mother's village. As it drew nearer to midday, the heat grew more oppressive, and Hans found himself upon a wide moor, which it took about an hour to cross. The sun beat down upon his head, the air lay heavy and still, and his tongue clave to the roof of his mouth with thirst. "I can find a cure for this," thought Hans. "I will milk the cow now and refresh myself with the milk." He tied her to a withered tree, and as he had no pail, he put his leather cap underneath. But try as he would, not a drop of milk came. He set himself to work in a clumsy way, and the impatient beast at last gave him such a blow on the head with her hind foot that he fell upon the ground and for a long time could not think where he was. By good fortune, a butcher just then came along the road, pushing a wheelbarrow in which lay a young pig. "What sort of a trick is this?" cried he, and helped the good Hans up. Hans told him all that had happened. The butcher gave him his flask and said, "Take a drink and refresh yourself. The cow will certainly give no milk. It is an old beast. At the best, it is only fit for the plow or for the butcher." "Well, well," said Hans, stroking his hair down upon his head, "who would have thought it? Certainly, it is a fine thing when one can kill a beast like that at home. What meat one has, but I do not care much for beef. It is not juicy enough for me. A young pig like that now is the thing to have. It tastes quite different. And then there are the sausages. Hark ye, Hans," said the butcher, "out of love for you, I will exchange, and will let you have the pig for the cow." "Heaven repay you for your kindness," cried Hans gladly, and he gave up the cow, while the pig was unbound from the barrow, and the cord by which it was tied was put into his hand. Hans went on his way once more, thinking how everything was turning out exactly as he wished, and that if he met with any vexation, it was always set right again at once. Hans went on his way, leading the pig by the cord, and his heart was light within him. He thought how wonderfully everything had turned out, and how each time some small misfortune had been followed at once by good luck. "It must surely be so," said he to himself, "that heaven watches over me. Whatever I wish for comes to me of its own accord." He had not gone far when he was joined by a lad who carried a fine white goose under his arm. They greeted each other kindly, as travelers do upon the road, and fell into talk. Hans told the boy of his good fortune and how he had always managed to make such excellent bargains. The lad listened, nodding his head, and then told Hans that he was taking the goose to a christening feast. "Just lift her," said he, and laid hold of the goose by the wings. "How heavy she is! She has been fattened for the last 8 weeks. Whoever has a bit of her when she is roasted will have to wipe the fat from both sides of his mouth." "Yes," said Hans, weighing the goose in his hand, "she is a good weight indeed. Still, my pig is no bad one." As they went on together, the lad began to look from side to side in a restless manner, and at last he shook his head gravely. "Look here," said he, lowering his voice, "it may not be all right with your pig. In the village through which I passed, the mayor himself had just had one stolen out of its sty. They have sent people out in all directions, and it would be a bad business if they were to catch you with the pig. At the very least, you would be shut up in the dark hole." The good Hans was terrified at these words. His cheerful face grew pale, and his heart beat fast. "Goodness," cried he, "help me out of this fix. You know more about this place than I do. Take my pig and leave me your goose. I would rather go without meat than get into such trouble." "I shall risk something myself by doing this," answered the lad, "but I will not be the cause of your getting into mischief." And with that, he took the cord from Hans's hand, drove the pig quickly away by a bypath, and was soon out of sight. Hans stood still for a moment, listening and looking after him. Then, when he saw that no one was pursuing him, he drew a deep breath and pressed the goose closer under his arm. "How lucky I am," said he, "to have been saved in time. What would have become of me if they had caught me with the pig? Now all is well again." He went on his way free from care and thought over his last exchange. "When I consider it properly," said he to himself, "I have gained by it after all. First, there is the good roast meat, then the quantity of fat which will drip from it, and which will give me dripping for my bread for a quarter of a year. And lastly, the beautiful white feathers. I will have my pillow stuffed with them, and then indeed I shall sleep softly without rocking. How glad my mother will be when she sees this fine goose." Thus comforted, Hans walked briskly on, humming a little tune to himself and seeing nothing before him but good fortune. When he passed through the last village before his home, he heard a strange humming and singing, and soon he came upon a scissors grinder who stood by the roadside with his barrow. As his wheel whirred, he sang, "I sharpen scissors and quickly grind, my coat blows out in the wind behind." Hans stood still and listened with wonder. At last he spoke and said, "All's well with you, as you are so merry with your grinding." "Yes," answered the grinder, "the trade has a golden foundation. A real grinder is a man who, as often as he puts his hand into his pocket, finds gold in it." "But where did you buy that fine goose?" "I did not buy it," said Hans. "I exchanged my pig for it, and the pig that I got for a cow, and the cow I took that instead of a horse, and the horse, for that I gave a lump of gold as big as my head, and the gold, well, that was my wages for 7 years' service." "You have known how to look after yourself each time," said the grinder, shaking his head in admiration. "If you can only get on so far as to hear the money jingle in your pocket, whenever you stand up, you will have made your fortune." "How shall I manage that?" asked Hans eagerly. "You must be a grinder, as I am," answered the man. "Nothing particular is wanted for it but a grindstone. The rest finds itself. I have one here. It is a little worn, but you need not give me anything for it but your goose. Will you do it?" "How can you ask?" cried Hans joyfully. "I shall be the luckiest fellow on earth if I have money. Whenever I put my hand into my pocket, what need I trouble about anything more?" And without hesitation, he handed over the goose and received the grindstone in exchange. "Now," said the grinder, taking up another heavy stone that lay by him, "here is a strong stone into the bargain. You can hammer well upon it and straighten your old nails. Take it with you and keep it carefully." Hans loaded himself with the stones and went on his way with a contented heart. His eyes shone with joy, and he felt as though all the world were smiling upon him. "I must have been born with a caul," he cried. "Everything I wish for happens to me, just as if I were a Sunday child." But as he had been on his legs since daybreak, he soon began to feel tired. Hunger also tormented him, for in his joy at the bargain, by which he had got the cow, he had eaten up all his store of food at once. Now he had nothing left, and the weight of the stones pressed heavily upon him. Step by step he went more slowly and was forced to stop every minute to rest. "The stones are very useful," thought Hans, "but they are heavy to carry. Still, one cannot have everything in the world." At last he came to a well in a field, and there he thought he would rest and refresh himself with a cool draught of water. But in order that he might not injure the stones in sitting down, he laid them carefully by his side on the edge of the well. Then he sat down and was stooping to drink when his foot slipped. He pushed against the stones, and both of them fell with a splash into the water. When Hans saw them sinking to the bottom before his eyes, he stood still for a moment in wonder. Then he jumped for joy, knelt down, and with tears in his eyes, thanked God for having shown him this favor also, and for delivering him so kindly, and without his having any need to reproach himself from those heavy stones which had been the only things that troubled him. "There is no man under the sun so fortunate as I," he cried aloud. With a light heart and free from every burden, Hans ran on until he reached his mother's house, glad and content, and believing himself richer than any king upon earth. The wise servant. How fortunate is the master, and how smoothly all goes in his household when he is served by a wise servant, one who listens carefully to his orders and then does not obey them, but instead follows his own understanding. Such a servant spares his master much trouble, though not always in the way the master expects. A clever fellow of this sort, called John, once lived in the service of a master who trusted him greatly. One day, the master sent him out to look for a cow that had strayed from the pasture. John took the task upon himself at once and went his way. He stayed away a long time. The hours passed, and still he did not return. The master waited patiently and said to himself, "Faithful, John does not spare any pains in his work. He will not come back until he has done what he was sent to do." But when evening approached and John was nowhere to be seen, the master began to grow uneasy. Fearing that some misfortune had befallen the boy, he set out himself to search for him. He had to wander far before he found him. At last, in a wide field, he saw John running back and forth with great eagerness, as if fully occupied with an important matter. "Well, dear John," said the master, when he reached him, "hast thou found the cow which I sent thee to seek?" "No, master," answered John calmly, "I have not found the cow." "That is unfortunate," said the master, "but thou hast surely looked for it?" "No," replied John, "I have not looked for it at all." The master stared at him. Then, "What hast thou been looking for, John?" "For something better," said John, "and that I have found." "And what is that?" asked the master. "3 blackbirds," answered John. "3 blackbirds," said the master. "And where are they?" "I see one of them," said John. "I hear the other, and I am running after the third." Take example from this. Do not trouble yourselves too much about your masters or their orders, but rather do what comes into your head and pleases you. Then you will act just as wisely as prudent John. The Robber Bridegroom. There was once a miller who had a beautiful daughter, and when she was grown up, he became anxious that she should be well married and well taken care of. He was a careful man and thought much of respectability and order, and he said to himself that if a decent sort of man should come and ask for his daughter in marriage, he would not refuse him. He wished to see her settled and believed that a good appearance and fair speech were signs enough of a good heart. Not long after, a suitor came forward who seemed to be well-to-do and carried himself with confidence. His clothes were fine, his words smooth, and his manners such as pleased the miller. As the father knew nothing to the man's disadvantage, he promised him his daughter without delay. All was arranged, and the wedding day was spoken of as a thing certain. But the girl did not love him as a bride should love her bridegroom. She had no confidence in him, and though she could give no clear reason for it, she felt uneasy whenever he came near her. As often as she saw him or even thought of him, a chill ran through her heart, and she could not rid herself of the feeling. She obeyed her father and spoke politely, but her joy was forced and her mind was troubled. One day the bridegroom said to her, "You are to be my bride, and yet you have never been to see me at my own house." The girl answered, "I do not know where your house is." Then he said, "My house lies a long way in the wood." At these words, she felt more uneasy than before and began to make excuses, saying that she could not find the way to it and that the path through the forest was strange to her. But the bridegroom would not listen. "You must come and pay me a visit next Sunday," said he. "I have already invited company, and I will strew ashes on the path through the wood so that you will be sure to find it." When Sunday came, the girl set out upon her way. Though the sun shone and the day was fair, she felt heavy at heart, and she did not know why. A sense of fear followed her, as though she were walking toward something that wished her harm. Without thinking long upon it, she filled both pockets full of peas and lentils, as if her hands had guided themselves. Soon she came to the edge of the wood, and there she found ashes strewn upon the path as the bridegroom had promised. Yet she did not trust the sign, and at each step she cast a few peas and lentils to the right and left upon the ground. Thus she went on the whole day, deeper and deeper into the forest, until she came to the middle of it, where the trees stood thickest and the light was dim. There, in a lonely place, stood a house. It was large, but it did not please her eyes, for it was dismal and unhomelike. The walls were dark, the windows narrow, and no smoke rose from the chimney. Everything about it seemed silent and forsaken. She stood still before the door, and for a moment wished to turn back, but she gathered her courage and went in. The house was empty, and the stillness within was greater than without. Her footsteps sounded strangely upon the floor, and no voice answered her call. Suddenly she heard a voice cry, turn back, thou pretty bride. Within this house thou must not bide, for here do evil things betide." She started and looked about her, and then perceived that the voice came from a bird hanging in a cage by the wall. And again it cried, turn back, thou pretty bride. Within this house thou must not bide, for here do evil things betide." The girl trembled, yet she went on from one room into another through the whole house. All were empty, and no living soul was to be found. The silence weighed upon her, and every door she opened seemed to lead only into greater loneliness. At last she came to a door that led downward, and she went into the cellar. There sat a very old woman, nodding her head as though she were half asleep. The bride felt some comfort at the sight of a human being and said, "Can you tell me if my bridegroom lives here?" The old woman looked at her long and sadly. "Oh, poor child," said she at last, "do you know what has happened to you? You are in a place of cutthroats. You thought you were a bride and soon to be married, but death will be your spouse. Look there, I have a great kettle of water to set on, and when once they have you in their power, they will cut you in pieces without mercy, cook you, and eat you, for they are cannibals. Unless I have pity on you and save you, all is over with you." At these words the girl stood as though turned to stone, and her knees shook beneath her. The old woman, seeing her terror, rose with difficulty and led her behind a great cask that stood in the corner. "Be as still as a mouse," said she. "Do not move or go away, or else you are lost. At night, when the robbers are asleep, we will escape. I have been waiting a long time for such an opportunity." No sooner had the old woman hidden the girl than the door above was thrown open, and the wicked gang came into the house. They were noisy and unruly, for they had been drinking, and they dragged with them another young woman who wept and cried aloud. Her cries echoed through the cellar, but the robbers only laughed and mocked her misery. The poor bride, hidden behind the great cask, shook and trembled in silence. She pressed herself close to the wood, scarcely daring to breathe, for every sound seemed loud in her ears. From her hiding place she saw all that was done, and her heart beat so violently that she feared it would betray her. The robbers gave the young woman wine to drink, 3 glasses full, one of white wine, one of red, and one of yellow. When she had drunk them, her strength failed her, and her cries grew faint. Then, without mercy, they fell upon her, cut her in pieces, and prepared her for their dreadful feast. The bride turned her eyes away when she could, but terror held her fast, and she could not shut out the sight entirely. One of the robbers noticed that the poor victim wore a golden ring upon her little finger. He tried to pull it off, but it would not come. Angry at this, he took an axe and chopped the finger off. The finger flew through the air and fell behind the great cask upon the lap of the hidden bride. She started with horror, but forced herself to remain still, though her whole body shook. The robber lit a candle and began to look for the finger. He searched the floor and the corners, but could not find it. "Have you looked behind the great cask?" said one of the others. But the old woman cried out quickly, "Come to supper and leave off looking till tomorrow. The finger cannot run away." The robbers laughed, agreed with her, and left off searching. They sat down to eat, and the old woman, who had long waited for such a moment, dropped some sleeping stuff into their wine. One after another, they stretched themselves upon the cellar floor, and soon they were all sleeping and snoring heavily, when the bride heard that she came softly from behind the cask. Her limbs trembled beneath her, and she had to make her way among the sleepers lying all about on the ground. She feared at every step lest she might awaken one of them, but by good fortune she passed through without harm. The old woman followed her, and together they opened the door and hastened away from that house of murderers. Outside, the night air felt cool and strange upon their faces. The wind had carried away the ashes from the path through the wood, so that no sign of them remained. But the peas and lentils which the girl had scattered had budded and sprung up, and the moon shone upon them, showing the way clearly. Thus they went on through the night, guided by the pale light and the little green shoots, until at last, when morning came, they reached the mill. There the girl fell into her father's arms and told him all that had happened to her, from the first uneasy feeling to the last terror in the cellar. The miller listened in horror and grief, and thanked God that his child had been saved from such danger. When the wedding day came, the friends and neighbors assembled, for the miller had invited them all, and the bridegroom also appeared among the guests. They sat down at table, and according to custom, each one was asked to tell a story. The bride sat silent and pale, and spoke not a word. At last the bridegroom turned to her and said, "Now, sweetheart, do you know no story? Tell us something." She answered calmly, "I will tell you my dream." And she began and told her tale as though it were a dream, speaking clearly and steadily, while all listened. She spoke of going alone through a wood, of coming to a lonely house, and of the bird in the cage that cried, turn back, thou pretty bride. Within this house thou must not bide, for evil things do here betide." "Sweetheart," said she, "my dream is not yet ended." She went on to tell how she had gone through the empty rooms and down into the cellar, where an old woman sat nodding her head, and how that woman had warned her that she was among cutthroats, and that death would be her bridegroom. "Sweetheart," she said again, "my dream is not yet ended." She told how the old woman had hidden her behind a great cask, and how the robbers had come home dragging with them a young woman. She told how they gave her wine to drink, white, red, and yellow, and how they killed her and cut her in pieces. "Sweetheart," she said once more, "my dream is not yet ended." Then she spoke of the golden ring upon the little finger, and how one of the robbers chopped off the finger with an axe, and how it fell behind the cask upon her lap. "And here is the finger with the ring," said the bride, and at these words she drew it forth and showed it to the company. When the bridegroom saw it, he turned deadly pale. He sprang up from his seat and would have fled, but the guests seized him and held him fast. He was delivered up to justice, and he and his whole gang were condemned and executed for their evil deeds. Thus the wicked were punished, and the innocent was saved. The King of the Golden Mountain. There was once a merchant who lived in a prosperous town, and was known far and wide for his wealth and good fortune. He had 2 children, a boy and a girl, who were still so young that they could not yet walk, and he cherished them greatly, believing that his riches would one day secure their future. His warehouses were full, his coffers heavy with gold, and his name was spoken with respect among other merchants. trusting in his luck, he sent 2 richly laden ships out to sea, carrying all that he possessed, for he hoped to double his wealth through trade in distant lands. For a time, his heart was light, and each day he imagined the profit that would soon return to him. But misfortune came swiftly and without warning. News arrived that both ships had been caught by a great storm and had sunk to the bottom of the sea, taking with them all his goods. In a single hour, he was ruined. Instead of being a rich man, he became a poor one, and nothing remained to him but a single field lying outside the town walls. This sudden fall weighed heavily upon him. He could neither eat nor sleep, and his thoughts were filled with fear for his children, who were still helpless and unaware of the change that had come upon their lives. In order to drive his sorrow from his mind, he went out one day to walk upon his field. Backwards and forwards he paced, lost in anxious thoughts, when suddenly a little black mannikin stood beside him as though he had risen out of the earth. The strange little figure looked up at the merchant and said, "Why art thou so sad, and what is it that lies so heavily upon thy heart?" The merchant was startled, yet he answered cautiously, "If thou couldst help me, I would willingly tell thee." "Who knows?" replied the little black dwarf. "Perhaps I can help thee." Encouraged by these words, the merchant told him of his lost ships, his vanished fortune, and how nothing remained to him but this field. When he had finished, the dwarf nodded, as though such matters were of little importance. "Do not trouble thyself," said he. "If thou wilt promise to give me the first thing that rubs itself against thy leg when thou art at home again, and to bring it here to this place in 12 years' time, thou shalt have as much money as thou wilt." The merchant thought to himself, "What can that be but my dog?" For he had not at that moment any thought of his children. Blinded by his distress and the hope of sudden wealth, he agreed. He wrote out a promise, set his hand and seal to it, and gave it to the black dwarf, who took it with a smile and vanished as suddenly as he had appeared. When the merchant returned home, his heart was already lighter, though he saw no sign of money in his chest. As soon as he entered the house, his little boy, who had learned to hold himself upright by clinging to furniture, tottered toward him with joy. The child seized him fast by the legs, laughing as children do. At that moment, the father stood still, as though struck by lightning. He remembered his promise and knew at once what he had pledged away. Fear seized him, and he trembled at the thought of what he had done. Yet, when he searched his house and found no money, he tried to comfort himself by believing that the black dwarf had been jesting and that no harm would come of it. A month later, however, when he went up into the garret, intending to gather together some old tin to sell, he found there a great heap of money lying before him. Now his fear faded, and joy took its place. He bought new goods, entered trade again, and soon became a greater merchant than before. His house was once more full, and his name regained its former honor. He began to think that this world was well governed and that fortune favored those who dared. Meanwhile, his children grew, and especially the boy who became tall, strong, and clever beyond his years. But the nearer the 12th year approached, the more anxious the merchant became. His distress could be read plainly in his face, and he often sat silent and troubled. At last, his son noticed this and asked him what sorrow weighed upon him. For a long time the father would not speak, But the boy pressed him so earnestly that he could keep silence no longer. Then the merchant confessed all how he had promised his son to a black dwarf, and had received wealth in return, and how the time was now near when the promise must be fulfilled. When the boy heard this, he did not weep, nor show fear, but said calmly, "O Father, do not be uneasy. All will go well. The black man has no power over me. He had himself blessed by the priest, and when the appointed day came, father and son went together to the field. There the son made a circle and placed himself within it, and his father stood beside him. Soon the black dwarf appeared and said, 'Hast thou brought with thee that which thou hast promised me?' The father stood silent, but the son spoke and said, 'What dost thou want here?' The dwarf replied angrily, 'I have to speak with thy father and not with thee.' But the son answered boldly, 'Thou hast betrayed and misled my father. Give back the writing.' 'No,' said the dwarf, 'I will not give up my rights.' They spoke long together until at last an agreement was made. Since the son did not belong to the enemy of mankind, nor yet wholly to his father, it was decided that he should be placed in a small boat upon running water, and that his father should push it away with his own foot. Thus the son would be given up to the water. With sorrowful hearts, they parted. The son stepped into the little boat, and the father, weeping, pushed it away. The boat turned over, and the father believed his son was lost. The father returned home with heavy steps, believing that his son had been swallowed by the waters and lost forever. But the little boat did not sink. Though it had turned so that the keel lay uppermost, it floated quietly onward, borne by the current, and the boy sat safely within it. He neither cried nor called out, but committed himself to God and trusted that whatever might happen would be for the best. For a long time the boat drifted thus through lonely waters where no shore could be seen. The sun rose and set, and the boy grew weary, yet the boat bore him gently onward until at last it touched land beside an unknown shore. Then he stepped out, gave thanks that his life had been spared, and looked about him. Before him rose a beautiful castle built of shining stone with high towers and wide gates. Yet all was silent, and no sound of human life came from within. Wondering who might dwell there, he set out toward it. The gates stood open, and he passed through them without hindrance. But when he entered the halls, he found them empty. Room after room he went through, and though all was splendid, no living creature did he meet, until at last he came to the final chamber. There, coiled upon the floor in a ring, lay a great snake. At first the boy was startled, but the snake raised its head and spoke with a human voice, gentle and sorrowful. It told him that it was not truly a snake, but an enchanted maiden, and that she rejoiced to see him. "Hast thou come at last, O my deliverer?" she said. "I have waited 12 long years for thee. This whole kingdom is bewitched, and thou alone canst set it free." The boy listened in silence, and then asked how such a thing might be done. "This night," said the snake, 12 black men bound with chains will come and ask what thou doest here. Give them no answer, speak not a single word, and let them do with thee as they will. They will torment thee sorely, but thou must endure it in silence. At 12 o'clock their power will be broken, and they must depart. On the second night 12 others will come, and on the third night 24, who will cut off thy head. But if thou endurest all without speaking, I shall be freed. I will come to thee with the water of life and restore thee." The boy did not waver. "I will gladly set thee free," said he. When night fell, the first 12 black men came clanking their chains. They questioned him harshly, but he remained silent. Then they beat him, struck him, and tormented him in every way, yet no word escaped his lips. At the stroke of 12, they vanished, and he lay bruised and bleeding, but alive. On the second night, 12 more came fiercer than the first. They mocked him, stabbed him, and wounded him grievously, but still he did not speak. When midnight came, they too were forced to depart. On the third night, the 24 appeared. They seized him and without mercy cut off his head. But at 12 o'clock their power ended, and they were gone. Then the enchanted maiden came, now no longer a snake, but a beautiful princess. She bore a bottle containing the water of life, anointed his body, and placed his head once more upon his shoulders. Immediately he revived whole and sound as before. She threw herself into his arms, and the whole castle rang with joy. The spell was broken, the kingdom freed, and all who had been bewitched returned to their rightful forms. Soon afterward, their marriage was celebrated with great splendor, and the boy became king of the Golden Mountain. They lived together in happiness and honor, and after a time, the queen bore a fine son. 8 years passed in peace, until one day the king thought of his father. His heart was moved with longing, and he wished to visit him. But the queen grew pale and said, "I know beforehand that this journey will bring misfortune upon me." Yet he urged her so earnestly that at last she consented. At their parting, she gave him a wishing ring and said, "Put this ring upon thy finger, and thou shalt be transported wherever thou desirest. But promise me one thing, never wish me away from this place and to thy father." He promised, put the ring on his finger, and wished himself home. Instantly, he stood outside the town where his father lived. But when he came to the gate, the sentries would not let him enter, for his clothing was too rich and strange. So he went to a shepherd, exchanged garments with him, and entered the town, dressed in a poor coat. When he came to his parents, they did not recognize him. His father said that his son had died long ago, yet offered him food. Then the king showed them the mark beneath his arm, and they knew him at last. But when he told them that he was king of the Golden Mountain, his father doubted him and mocked his appearance. Angered by this, and forgetting his promise, the king turned his ring and wished his wife and child to him. Instantly they stood there, but the queen wept bitterly and reproached him for breaking his word. Though she pretended to forgive him, mischief filled her heart. After this, the king led the queen out of the town and into the open field, where the stream still flowed beside the meadow. He showed her the place where long ago his father had pushed the little boat away, and where his own fate had first been decided. Weariness then overcame him, for his heart was heavy with anger and sorrow. He said to the queen, "I am tired. Sit down a while, and let me rest my head upon thy lap." She sat upon the grass, and he laid his head upon her knees, and soon fell fast asleep. When she saw that his eyes were closed and his breath deep, and even she looked cautiously about her, then she gently drew the wishing ring from his finger. After that she slipped away the foot that lay beneath his head, leaving only a slipper behind as a token. Taking her child in her arms, she put the ring upon her finger and wished herself back to her own kingdom. In a moment, she and the child were gone. When the king awoke, the sun stood high in the sky. He rose in haste, but found himself alone. His wife and child had vanished, and the ring was no longer upon his hand. Only the slipper lay beside him. Then he knew that he had been betrayed, and his heart sank within him. To my parents I cannot return, thought he, for they would say that I am a wizard. I must go forth into the world and seek my kingdom again. So he set out, walking onward without rest, until at length he came to a hill where 3 giants stood disputing loudly with one another. They were quarreling over their father's inheritance, for none of them knew how it should be divided. When they saw the king approaching, they called to him and said that little men often had quick wits, and that he should divide their inheritance for them. The inheritance consisted of 3 wondrous things. The first was a sword, which had this power if anyone held it, and said, "All heads off but mine," every head would fall to the ground. The second was a cloak, which made the wearer invisible. The third was a pair of boots, which could transport the wearer to any place he wished in a moment. The king asked to examine the treasures. The giants gave him the cloak, and when he put it on, he became invisible and changed himself into a fly. Then he resumed his own form and said, "The cloak is good. Now give me the sword." They feared to do so, but allowed him to try it against a tree. With one stroke, the tree was cleft in 2 as though it were straw. Then he asked for the boots, and though the giants hesitated, they gave them to him also. When he had gained all 3 treasures, he thought only of his wife and child. He said softly to himself, "Oh, if I were but upon the golden mountain!" And in that instant he vanished from the sight of the giants, and thus their inheritance was divided. When he drew near to his palace, he heard music and sounds of great rejoicing. People told him that the queen was celebrating her wedding with another. At this, his wrath flamed up, and he said, "False woman, she betrayed me while I slept." He put on his cloak and entered the palace unseen. In the great hall, a feast was spread, and the guests ate and drank and laughed. The queen sat in royal splendor, crowned and richly dressed. The king stood behind her, unseen. When she placed food upon her plate, he took it away and ate it. When she poured wine for herself, he drank it. Thus, she took and yet received nothing. At last, she grew pale and ashamed, rose from her seat, and went to her chamber, and wept. He followed her there, and made himself visible. She cried out in fear, but he struck her, and said, "Did thy deliverer never come? It is he who now stands before thee, thou traitor." Then he went back into the hall and cried, "The wedding is at an end. The true king has returned." The princes and counselors mocked him and sought to seize him. But he drew his sword and said, "All heads off but mine." At once all their heads fell to the ground, and he alone stood master of the hall. Thus he was once more king of the Golden Mountain. He took back his kingdom and ruled it with justice and strength, and none dared to betray him again. And thus, after many trials and great suffering, he kept what was rightfully his, and lived as king all the days of his life. The Peasant and the Devil. There was once a far-sighted and crafty peasant whose clever tricks were well known throughout the countryside. Many stories were told of him, but the best of all was how he once outwitted the devil himself and made a fool of him by nothing more than sharp thinking and patience. One evening, the peasant had been working in his field longer than usual. Twilight was already falling, and he was gathering his tools to return home when he noticed something strange in the middle of the field. A heap of burning coals lay there glowing red and bright against the darkening earth. Full of astonishment, he went closer, and there, sitting calmly upon the live coals, was a little black devil. "Well," said the peasant without fear, "thou dost indeed sit upon a treasure." "That is true," answered the devil readily. "It is a treasure filled with more gold and silver than thou hast ever seen in thy life." "The treasure lies in my field," said the peasant, "and therefore it belongs to me." "It shall be thine," replied the devil, "if thou wilt, for 2 years, give me half of everything thy field produces. Money I have in abundance, but I desire the fruits of the earth." The peasant thought for a moment and agreed. "In order that no dispute may arise," said he, "everything that grows above the ground shall belong to thee, and all that is beneath the earth shall be mine." The devil was quite satisfied with this arrangement and laughed to himself, thinking he had made a clever bargain. But the peasant, who was wiser than he appeared, sowed turnips. When harvest time came, the devil returned eagerly to claim his share. He pulled and gathered, but all he found were yellow, withered leaves lying upon the soil. Meanwhile, the peasant dug beneath the earth and lifted out fine, heavy turnips, full and sound. At this, the devil was vexed. "Thou hast had the best of it this time," said he angrily, "but next year that trick shall not serve thee. What grows above the ground shall be thine, and what is under it shall belong to me." "I am willing," answered the peasant calmly. When the time came to sow again, he did not plant turnips, but wheat. The grain grew tall and strong, and when it ripened, the peasant went into the field and cut the stalks close to the ground. He carried the full sheaves home and stored them safely. The devil appeared once more to claim his share. He dug and clawed at the earth, but found nothing except dry roots and stubble. In a fury, he stamped his feet, cursed the peasant, and vanished into a cleft in the rocks, never to trouble him again. "That is the way to cheat the devil," said the peasant, and went and fetched away the treasure that lay beneath the coals. And so by wit rather than strength, he gained wealth and victory, and the devil learned that cunning is not easily matched. The Hare and the Hedgehog. This story, my dear young folks, may perhaps seem to you like something made up merely for amusement, but in truth, it is not so. It is a tale which I myself heard from my grandfather, and whenever he told it, he always said with a knowing smile, "It must be true, my son, or else no one could tell it to you." And since my grandfather was a man who did not care to deceive either himself or others, you may be sure that he spoke in all seriousness. The story happened one Sunday morning at harvest time, when the buckwheat was in full bloom. The sun stood bright in the heavens, the east wind blew warmly over the stubble fields, and the larks sang high in the air. The bees hummed among the flowers, the people were walking to church in their Sunday clothes, and all creatures seemed cheerful and contented. Among them, the hedgehog, too, was happy, for he was standing at the door of his little house, his arms set firmly at his sides, enjoying the morning breeze and quietly trilling a song to himself. It was neither better nor worse than the songs hedgehogs usually sing on a blessed Sunday morning, and it pleased him well enough. While he stood there humming and enjoying the fine weather, it suddenly occurred to him that since his wife was at home washing and drying the children, he might just as well take a walk into the fields to see how his turnips were getting on. The turnip field lay close beside his house, and as he and his family lived chiefly upon those turnips, he regarded them as his own property and thought it no small matter to look after them. So he shut the door behind him and set off along the path toward the field. He had not gone far and was just turning around the sloe bush that stood at the edge of the field when he caught sight of the hare. The hare, too, had come out early that morning to look after his vegetables, for he wished to see how his cabbages were thriving. When the hedgehog saw him, he bade him a friendly good morning. For the hedgehog was by nature peaceable and well-mannered. But the hare, who in his own eyes was a very distinguished gentleman indeed, and who was frightfully proud of his long legs, did not return the greeting in a friendly way. Instead, he looked down upon the hedgehog with a scornful air and said, "How is it that you are running about here in the field so early in the morning?" "I am taking a walk," replied the hedgehog quietly. "A walk?" cried the hare with a mocking smile. "It seems to me that you might use your legs for a better purpose." This remark angered the hedgehog beyond measure. He could bear many things, but he could not endure that anyone should mock his legs, which were crooked by nature and not of his own choosing. His eyes flashed, and he answered sharply, "You seem to imagine that you can do more with your legs than I can with mine." "That is exactly what I do imagine," replied the hare arrogantly. "That can be put to the test," said the hedgehog. "I wager that if we run a race together, I will outstrip you." The hare burst out laughing. "That is ridiculous. You with your short legs?" he cried. "But if you have such a monstrous fancy for it, I am quite willing." "What shall we wager?" "A gold louis d'or and a bottle of brandy," answered the hedgehog. "Agreed," said the hare. "Shake hands on it, and then we may as well begin at once." "Nay," replied the hedgehog, "there is no such great hurry. I am still fasting and must first go home and eat a little breakfast. In half an hour I shall be back here." The hare was quite satisfied with this and waited, for he felt certain of his victory. Meanwhile, the hedgehog went on his way home, thinking to himself, "The hare trusts in his long legs, but I shall yet get the better of him. He may be a great gentleman, but he is a foolish fellow, and he shall pay dearly for his pride." When the hedgehog reached home, he called to his wife and said, "Wife, dress thyself quickly. Thou must go with me to the field." "What is the matter now?" asked the hedgehog's wife. "I have made a wager with the hare," said he, "for a gold louis d'or and a bottle of brandy. I am to run a race with him, and thou must be present." "Good heavens, husband!" cried the wife. "Art thou out of thy senses? How canst thou think of racing with the hare?" "Hold thy tongue, woman," said the hedgehog. "That is my affair. Do not trouble thyself with matters which belong to men. Dress thyself and come with me." What was the poor wife to do? She obeyed him, though she went unwillingly. And as they walked together toward the field, the hedgehog explained to her his plan and said, "Attend carefully to what I say. The hare shall run in one furrow and I in another. Thou shalt stand at the far end, and when the hare comes, thou must cry out, I am here already." When all had been arranged as the hedgehog desired, he walked slowly up the field until he reached the top, where the hare was already standing full of impatience and confidence. The hare laughed quietly to himself as he watched the hedgehog approach, for he thought the matter already decided in his own favor. "Shall we begin?" asked the hare. "Certainly," replied the hedgehog. Then both at once, each took his place in his own furrow. The hare counted aloud 1, 2, 3 and away, and in an instant he rushed down the field like a storm wind so swiftly that his feet scarcely seemed to touch the ground. The hedgehog, however, ran no more than 3 short paces, then stooped down into his furrow and remained quite still, hidden among the leaves and earth. The hare flew on sure of his victory and reached the end of the field in a moment. There, standing quietly in the furrow, he saw the hedgehog, who cried out to him, "I am here already." The hare stood still in amazement. He rubbed his eyes and stared, for he could not understand how the hedgehog could possibly have reached the end before him. He thought it must surely be the hedgehog himself, for the creature standing there looked exactly like him in every respect. Yet a strange doubt crept into his mind. "That has not been done fairly," said the hare. "It must be run again." "As you please," answered the hedgehog calmly. Once more the hare placed himself at the top of the field and ran with all his might, faster even than before. But when he reached the other end, the hedgehog again cried out, "I am here already." The hare's pride was now deeply wounded. His heart beat fiercely, and his breath came quick and hot. "Again," he cried, "it must be run again." "For my part," said the hedgehog, "we can run as often as you choose." So the race was run again and again. Each time the hare rushed forward with furious speed, and each time when he reached the end of the field, he heard the same words, "I am here already." Sometimes the voice came from below, sometimes from above, but always it was there before him. The hare grew more and more bewildered and angry. He no longer laughed, nor did he boast. He thought only of winning, and his pride drove him onward. He ran 30 times, then 40, then 50, and still the hedgehog was always before him. Sweat poured from his body, his chest burned, and his legs trembled beneath him. Yet he would not stop, for he could not bear to be overcome by one whom he had mocked so cruelly. At the 74th race, however, his strength failed him entirely. In the middle of the field he staggered, gasped once for breath, and fell to the ground. Blood streamed from his mouth, and there he lay dead upon the spot. The hedgehog came quietly out of his furrow and looked at him. He did not rejoice loudly, nor did he mock the fallen hare. He simply took the gold louis d'or and the bottle of brandy which he had won, and called his wife out of her furrow. Then the two of them went home together in great contentment. And if they are not dead, they are living there still. Thus it came to pass that the hedgehog made the hare run races with him on the heath of Buxtehude until he died. And from that day forward, no hare ever felt any desire to race against a hedgehog of Buxtehude. The moral of this story is twofold. First, it teaches that no one, however great or swift he may be, should mock or jest at another who seems beneath him, even if that other be only a hedgehog. For pride often blinds the eyes and leads a man into his own ruin. Secondly, it teaches that when a man takes a wife, he should choose one of his own kind and condition, who looks as he himself looks and understands his ways. For as the hedgehog prospered with a hedgehog wife who was like himself in every respect, so it shall go well with others who do likewise. And so, whosoever is a hedgehog, let him see to it that his wife is a hedgehog also, and so forth. Fair Katrinelje and Pif-Paf-Poltrie. "Good day, Father Hollanthe," said Pif-Paf-Poltrie, stepping up politely and taking off his hat. "Many thanks, Pif-Paf-Poltrie," answered Father Hollanthe. "What brings you here so early?" "May I be allowed to have your daughter?" Father Hollanthe stroked his beard and thought for a moment. "Oh yes," said he at last, "if Mother Malco, Brother High and Mighty Sister Casa Trout, and fair Katrinelje herself are willing, you may have her." "Where is Mother Malco?" then asked Pif-Paf-Poltrie. "She is in the cow-house, milking the cow." So Pif-Paf-Poltrie went to the cow-house. "Good day, Mother Malco." "Many thanks, Pif-Paf-Poltrie," she answered without ceasing to milk. "What do you want? May I be allowed to have your daughter?" "Oh yes," said Mother Malco. "If Father Hollanthe, Brother High and Mighty Sister Casa Trout, and fair Katrinelje are willing, you may have her." "Where is Brother High and Mighty then?" "He is in the room chopping wood." Pif-Paf-Poltrie went inside. "Good day, Brother High and Mighty." "Many thanks," Pif-Paf-Poltrie answered, he lifting his axe. "What brings you here?" "May I be allowed to have your sister?" "Oh yes," said Brother High and Mighty. "If Father Hollanthe, Mother Malco, Sister Casa Trout, and fair Katrinelje are willing, you may have her." "Where is Sister Casa Trout then?" "She is in the garden cutting cabbages." So Pif-Paf-Poltrie went into the garden. "Good day, Sister Casa Trout." "Many thanks, Pif-Paf-Poltrie," she replied, straightening herself. "What do you seek?" "May I be allowed to have your sister?" "Oh yes," said Sister Casa Trout. "If Father Hollanthe, Mother Malco, Brother High and Mighty, and fair Katrinelje are willing, you may have her." "Where is fair Katrinelje then?" "She is in the room, counting out her farthings." Pif-Paf-Poltrie went inside. "Good day, fair Katrinelje." "Many thanks, Pif-Paf-Poltrie," said she, still counting. "What wouldst thou have? Wilt thou be my bride?" "Oh yes," said fair Katrinelje cheerfully. "If Father Hollanthe, Mother Malco, Brother High and Mighty, and Sister Casa Trout are willing, I am ready." Then Pif-Paf-Poltrie asked fair Katrinelje, "How much dowry dost thou have?" She answered proudly, 14 farthings in ready money, 3.5 groschen, owing to me 1/2 pound of dried apples, a handful of fried bread, and a handful of spices, and many other things are mine. Have I not a dowry fine?" Pif-Paf-Poltrie nodded. "And now tell me, fair Katrinelje, what is my trade? Art thou a tailor? Something better. A shoemaker? Something better. A husbandman? Something better. A joiner? Something better. A smith? Something better. A miller? Something better." She thought hard and at last said, "Perhaps a broom maker." "Yes," cried Pif-Paf-Poltrie joyfully, "that is what I am. And is it not a fine trade?" And fair Katrinelje laughed and thought it was fine enough. The Skilful Huntsman. There was once a young fellow who had learned the trade of locksmith, and when he had served his time, he told his father that he would now go out into the world and seek his fortune. The father listened to him quietly and said, "Very well, I am content with that." And he gave him a small sum of money for his journey, such as a poor man could spare. The youth set out gladly. For a while he wandered from place to place and sought work, and wherever he stayed, he practiced his craft honestly. Yet the more he labored at it, the less pleasure he took in it. Locks and keys no longer held his interest, and his hands grew weary of the same work day after day. As he traveled through woods and across open land, his eyes were drawn more often to the game that fled before him than to the tools in his pack, and a longing awoke in him for a freer life. At last, he said to himself, "This trade no longer pleases me. I will leave it and learn something else." And as fate would have it, not long afterward, he met a huntsman dressed all in green, who was walking through the forest with an easy step as one well acquainted with every path. The huntsman greeted him and asked whence he came and whither he was going. The youth answered that he had learned the trade of locksmith, but that it no longer suited him, and that he felt a strong desire to become a huntsman. "If thou wilt teach me," said he, "I will gladly serve thee." "Oh yes," answered the huntsman, "that may well be done if thou wilt go with me." So the youth went with him and bound himself to him for several years. During that time, he learned the art of hunting thoroughly. He learned how to follow a track over hard ground and soft, how to read the signs of beasts, and how to move through the forest without sound. He learned patience and watchfulness, and how to wait long hours without stirring. His master was strict but just, and taught him everything he knew. When the years had passed, the youth wished once more to try his luck elsewhere. The huntsman dismissed him kindly, but gave him no wages except an air gun. It was not a fine-looking weapon, yet it possessed a remarkable property. Whenever the youth aimed with it, it struck its mark without fail. With this gift, he set out again upon his journey. Before long, he came into a forest so large and dense that he could not reach its end in a single day. The trees stood close together, and the paths wound so strangely that he soon lost all sense of direction. When evening came, he feared the wild beasts that might roam there by night, so he climbed into a tall tree and seated himself among the branches. As midnight approached, he noticed a tiny glimmer of light far off in the distance. It shone faintly at first, but it did not vanish. He fixed its place carefully in his mind. Then he took off his hat and threw it down toward the light, so that when he climbed down, he might find his way by it. After that, he descended, went to the place where his hat lay, put it on again, and walked steadily forward. The farther he went, the brighter the light became, until at last he saw that it came from an enormous fire burning in a clearing. By it sat three giants, huge and dreadful to behold. An ox lay upon a spit before them, and they were roasting it over the flames. The youth concealed himself and watched. Presently, one of the giants said, "I must taste whether the meat is ready." And he tore off a piece and lifted it to his mouth. At that instant, the huntsman raised his air gun and shot the morsel cleanly out of the giant's hand. "Well, truly," said the giant in surprise, "if the wind has not blown it away." And he took another piece. But before he could bite it, the huntsman again shot it from his grasp. Angrily, the giant struck the one beside him and cried, "Why art thou snatching my food from me?" "I have not touched it," said the other. "A sharpshooter must be near." A third time, the giant took a piece, and a third time it was shot away. Then the giant said, "Whoever can shoot food from one's very mouth must be a good marksman, and such a one would be useful to us." He called out loudly, "Come forth, thou sharpshooter, and sit by our fire. Eat with us, and we will do thee no harm. But if thou wilt not come, and we must fetch thee by force, thou art a lost man." The youth stepped forward and said that he was a skilful huntsman, and that whatever he aimed at, he never failed to hit. The giants were pleased and spoke freely with him. They told him that beyond the forest lay a great lake, and behind it a tower, and in the tower a lovely princess was imprisoned. They wished to carry her off. "That can soon be done," said the huntsman. "But there is one thing more," said the giants. "A tiny little dog guards the place. The moment anyone comes near it, begins to bark, and then all the palace awakes. Canst thou shoot it dead?" "That will be a small matter," answered the huntsman. They brought him a boat, and he rowed across the lake alone. As soon as he stepped ashore, the little dog ran toward him and was about to bark. But before a sound escaped it, the huntsman raised his air gun and shot it dead. From the opposite shore, the giants rejoiced, believing the way was clear. But the huntsman said that he wished first to see how matters stood within, and that they must wait until he called them. He entered the tower. All within was quiet, and everyone slept. In the first chamber, he saw a sword hanging upon the wall made of pure silver. Upon it shone a golden star, and beside it lay a sealed letter. He broke it open and read that whoever bore the sword could slay all who opposed him. He took it and went on. At last he entered the chamber where the king's daughter lay asleep. She was so beautiful that he stood still, scarcely daring to breathe, and looked upon her long. For a long while the huntsman stood motionless beside the bed. The king's daughter lay in a deep and quiet sleep, and her beauty was such that it held him fast where he stood. The light in the chamber was faint, yet he could see her face clearly, calm and untouched by fear. Then a thought rose within him, and it troubled him. "How can I," said he to himself, "deliver an innocent maiden into the hands of wild giants whose minds are full of evil?" He turned away from the bed and looked about the chamber, seeking some sign by which he might later prove what he had done without harming her or breaking her rest. Beneath the bed stood a pair of slippers. On the right one was written her father's name with a star beside it, and on the left her own name, likewise marked with a star. She wore also a great neck-kerchief of silk, richly embroidered with gold. On the right side was the king's name, and on the left her own, all worked in golden letters. The huntsman took a pair of scissors and carefully cut off the right corner of the kerchief, folding it away in his knapsack. Then he took the right slipper, the one bearing the king's name, and placed it beside the kerchief. Last of all, he cut a small piece from the right side of her nightdress, doing so gently that she did not stir. When this was done, he left the chamber as quietly as he had entered, and the princess continued to sleep, unaware that her fate had been decided. When the huntsman returned to the gate, the giants were still waiting outside, restless and impatient. They expected him to bring the maiden forth, but instead he cried to them that she was already in their power. "The gate cannot be opened," said he, "but there is a hole through which ye may creep one by one." The first giant came forward at once. As soon as he thrust his head through the opening, the huntsman seized him by the hair, drew him in, and with one stroke of the silver sword cut off his head. Then he pulled the body through. He called to the second and dealt with him in the same manner, and then with the third. Thus all 3 giants lay dead, and the huntsman had freed the land from a great danger. He cut out their tongues and placed them in his knapsack as proof of his deed. Then he said to himself, "I will go home to my father and let him see what I have already done. After that I will travel further, and whatever fortune God is pleased to grant me will surely find me." But when morning came, the king awoke and learned that the giants were dead. He went at once to his daughter's chamber and asked who had delivered her. She could tell him nothing, for she had slept through all. Yet, when she rose, she found that one slipper was gone, that her kerchief was cut, and that her nightdress was missing a small piece. The king summoned all his court and asked who had slain the giants and set his daughter free. Now there was among his servants a captain who was one-eyed and hideous to look upon. He stepped forward boldly and claimed the deed as his own. The king believed him and declared that since he had accomplished such a great thing, he should marry the princess. But she turned pale and said, "Rather than marry that man, dear father, I will wander forth into the world as far as my legs can carry me." The king grew angry and said that if she would not marry the captain, she must lay aside her royal garments and go forth as a peasant girl. He sent her to a potter to learn a trade and to sell earthen vessels. She obeyed. She borrowed pots and dishes enough for a stall and promised to pay for them in the evening. Yet the king, hoping to break her will, ordered peasants to drive their carts over the stall. All the pottery was broken into 1,000 pieces. The princess wept bitterly, for she had nothing with which to pay. The potter would lend her no more, and she returned to her father in sorrow. Then Heda said, "I will have a small hut built for thee in the forest. There thou shalt cook for all who come, but take no payment." A sign was hung above the door on which was written, "Today given, tomorrow sold." Long did she dwell there cooking, without asking for reward. The rumor spread far and wide until it reached the huntsman. "That would suit me well," thought he, "for I am poor and have no money." He took his air gun and his knapsack, in which lay the proofs he had kept girded on the silver sword, and went into the forest. He found the hut and entered it. The maiden gave him food, and he was struck by her beauty. She asked whence he came, and he answered simply that he wandered about the world. Then she saw the sword at his side and asked how he had come by it, for she knew her father's name upon it. "I cut off the heads of 3 giants with this sword," said he, and he showed her their tongues, the slipper, the kerchief, and the piece of the night-dress. At that sight she rejoiced, for she knew him at once as her deliverer. The king's daughter lost no time. Filled with joy and relief, she said to the huntsman, "Come with me at once to my father, that the truth may be made known." And together they went from the hut to the royal castle. When the aged king saw his daughter return, he was astonished, for he had believed that she would remain in the forest all her life. She led him aside and told him all that had happened, and how the huntsman before him was the very man who had freed her from the giants. Then she showed him the proofs, one by one, the tongues of the 3 giants, the slipper bearing his own name, the piece of the kerchief, and the fragment of her night dress. The old king examined them closely. He saw the golden letters, recognized the embroidery, and knew that no deceit was possible. At last he said, "Now I see how everything has truly happened," and his heart was filled with gratitude and shame alike. He embraced his daughter and turned to the huntsman. "My son," said he, "thou hast done a great deed and hast suffered wrong in silence. I am glad that the truth has come to light. Thou shalt have my daughter to wife, and with her my favor." The maiden rejoiced, and the huntsman bowed his head and gave thanks. Word was sent through the castle that a feast should be prepared, for the king wished to make the matter known before all his court. When the day of the feast came, the huntsman was clothed in garments befitting a noble guest, so that none might know him for what he truly was. The king and his daughter entered the hall, and the one-eyed captain was seated there also, proud and confident, believing that his reward was secure. At table the captain sat on the left side of the king's daughter, while the huntsman sat on her right. The captain glanced often at the stranger beside her, thinking him some foreign lord, and wondered who he might be. When they had eaten and drunk, the king spoke. "I will now set before you a question," said he, "and he who answers it must speak truthfully." All listened in silence. "Suppose," said the king, "that a man claims he has slain 3 giants. He is asked where the giants' tongues are, and when search is made, no tongues are found in their heads. How can this be?" The captain, without hesitation, answered, "Then they cannot have had any tongues." A murmur passed through the hall. The king looked at him sternly. "That cannot be," said he. "Every creature that lives has a tongue. Tell me now, what punishment does such a man deserve who speaks falsely in a matter of life and death?" The captain answered boldly, "He deserves to be torn in pieces." At that, the king rose from his seat. "Thou hast spoken thy own sentence," said he. Guards stepped forward and seized the captain. He was cast into prison, and afterward he was torn in 4 pieces, as judgment had decreed. Then the king turned to the huntsman and bade him stand forth. Before all the court, the huntsman displayed once more the proofs of his deed. None doubted him now, and praise was spoken openly where silence had once reigned. Soon after this, the wedding of the king's daughter and the skilful huntsman was celebrated with great splendor. Joy filled the land, for the giants were gone, and justice had been done. The huntsman sent for his father and mother, and they came gladly, proud of their son and thankful for his good fortune. The old king lived to see his daughter happy and his kingdom at peace. When at last he died, the huntsman succeeded him and ruled wisely and well. He never forgot the years of wandering, nor the humble trade from which he had come, and he judged others fairly, remembering how easily truth may be hidden, and how long falsehood may prosper. Thus, the skilful huntsman rose from a simple apprentice to a king, not by deceit or cruelty, but by courage, restraint, and faithfulness to what was right. And they lived long together in happiness, as long as God was pleased to grant it. The 3 Little Men in the Wood. There was once a man whose wife was dead, and a woman whose husband was dead. And the man had a daughter, and so had the woman. The 2 girls were acquainted with each other, and would sometimes play together in the woman's house. Now the woman was sly and false of heart, and she soon began to cast her thoughts upon the man and his household. One day she said to the man's daughter, "Listen to me, and do as I tell thee. Say to thy father that I will marry him, and then thou shalt have milk to wash in every morning, and wine to drink, while my daughter shall have water to wash in, and water to drink." The girl went home and told her father exactly what the woman had said. The man listened and was troubled, for he said to himself, "Marriage is a joy and also a torment." For a long time he did not know what to do, until at last he resolved to leave the matter to a sign. He took off his boot and said to his daughter, "Take this boot, it has a hole in the sole. Go up into the loft, hang it on the big nail, and pour water into it. If it holds water, I will once more take to me a wife. But if it lets the water run out, then so will I not." The girl did as she was told. She hung the boot upon the nail and poured water into it, and behold, the hole closed up, and the boot held water to the very brim. She went down and told her father what had happened, and he went up himself to see it with his own eyes. As there was no mistake, he went to the widow and courted her, and soon after they were married. On the first morning after the wedding, when the two girls awoke, there stood by the bedside of the man's daughter milk to wash in and wine to drink, and by the bedside of the woman's daughter there stood water to wash in and water to drink. On the second morning there stood water and water for both alike. But on the third morning there stood water to wash in and water to drink for the man's daughter, and milk and wine for the woman's daughter. And so it remained ever after. From that day the woman hated her stepdaughter and never knew how to treat her badly enough. She was eaten up with jealousy, for the man's daughter was gentle and pleasant and grew prettier every day, while her own daughter was ugly in face and heart and hateful in her ways. Once in winter, when the frost lay hard upon the ground and the snow-covered hill and valley, the woman made a frock out of paper. She called her stepdaughter and said, "Here, put on this frock and go out into the wood and fetch me a basket of strawberries. I have a great longing for them." "Oh dear," said the girl, "there are no strawberries to be found in winter. The ground is frozen and the snow covers everything. And why should I go in a paper frock? It is so cold that one's breath freezes, and the wind will blow through it and tear it from my back." "How darest thou contradict me?" cried the stepmother. "Be off at once, and do not let me see thee again until thou bringest me a basket of strawberries." Then she gave her a little piece of hard bread and said, "That will suffice thee for the day." And she thought to herself, "She will be frozen or starved to death, and I shall never set eyes on her again." The girl obeyed without complaint. She put on the paper frock, took the basket, and went her way. The snow lay deep everywhere, and there was not a blade of green to be seen. When she entered the wood, she saw a little house and 3 little men peeping out from it. She wished them good day and knocked modestly at the door. They called her in, and she entered and sat down by the oven to warm herself and to eat her bread. The little men said, "Give us some of it." Willingly answered the girl, and she broke her little piece of bread in 2 and gave them half. Then they asked her what she was doing in the wood at such a bitter season, and she told them gently all that had befallen her. When she had eaten, they gave her a broom and told her to go and sweep the snow away from the back door. She went out at once and did as she was bid. While she was gone, the little men spoke together among themselves, for they saw that she was good-hearted and kind. The first said, "She shall grow prettier every day." The second said, "Each time she speaks, a piece of gold shall fall from her mouth." The third said, "A king shall come and take her for his wife." When the girl had swept away the snow, she found behind the little house fine ripe strawberries showing red and fresh against the white snow. She filled her basket joyfully, thanked the little men, shook hands with them all, and hastened home. As she entered the house and said, "Good evening," a piece of gold fell from her mouth. She told her stepmother all that had happened, and at every word more gold fell until the room was strewn with it. "Only look at her pride and conceit," cried the stepsister, "throwing money about in such a way." But in her heart she was jealous, and she begged to be allowed to go into the wood herself to fetch strawberries. At first her mother refused, saying it was too cold, but at last she gave way, dressed her daughter in a warm fur coat, and gave her bread and butter and cakes to eat on the way. The girl went straight into the wood and to the little house. The three little men peeped out again, but she gave them no greeting. She came stamping into the room, sat down by the oven, and ate her food without offering them a bite. When they asked for some, she answered roughly that she had not enough even for herself. Then they bade her sweep the snow away from the back door. "Oh, do it yourselves," said she. "I am not your housemaid." At last she went out, but she swept carelessly and with ill will, and when she found no strawberries, she returned home in anger. The little men, seeing her wicked heart, spoke together again. The first said, "She shall grow uglier every day." The second said, "Each time she speaks, a toad shall leap from her mouth." The third said, "She shall die a miserable death." When she reached home and opened her mouth to speak, a toad sprang out at every word, so that all who saw her were filled with disgust. The stepmother's hatred now grew fiercer than ever, and she sought only how she might destroy the man's daughter altogether. At last she set a kettle on the fire and scalded some yarn. When it was ready, she hung it over the girl's shoulder, gave her an axe, and bade her go to the frozen river, break a hole in the ice, and rinse the yarn there. The girl obeyed and went to the river and began to hew the ice. And as she was doing so, a splendid coach came driving by, in which sat the king. The horses were white as snow, the harness glittered, and the coachman reined in when the king perceived the girl standing by the frozen river. He ordered the carriage to stop and called to her, "My child, who art thou, and what doest thou here in such bitter cold?" "I am a poor girl," answered she, "and I am rinsing yarn." She spoke gently and without complaint, though her hands were numbed by the frost, and the axe lay heavy at her feet. The king looked upon her with compassion, for her face was fair and modest, and her bearing quiet and patient. "Wilt thou go with me?" said he. "Oh yes," she answered, "with all my heart." And she was glad to be delivered from her stepmother and her sister, and from the cold and cruelty she had so long endured. Then she stepped into the coach, and they drove away together. When they came to the king's castle, great wonder was felt at her beauty and her gentle manners, and before long the wedding was celebrated with much splendor, even as the three little men in the wood had foretold. Thus the poor maiden became queen, and all who knew her rejoiced in her good fortune. At the end of a year, the young queen bore a son, and there was joy throughout the kingdom. Now when the stepmother heard of all this good luck, she was filled with envy and bitterness. She could not bear to think that the child she had sought to destroy should now be queen, while her own daughter sat at home in shame and misery. So she set out with her daughter for the castle, pretending that they wished only to visit the king and queen and to see the little child. They were received kindly, for the queen's heart was still gentle and unsuspecting. One day, when the king had gone out hunting and no one else was near, the wicked woman seized her opportunity. She took the queen by the head, and her daughter caught her by the feet, and together they dragged her out of bed. Then they threw her through the window into a stream that flowed beneath it. After that, the old woman put her own ugly daughter into the queen's bed, covered her up to the chin, and told her to keep still and say nothing. When the king returned and wished to speak with his wife, the stepmother cried out, "Stop, stop! She is sleeping sweetly and must not be disturbed today." The king suspected nothing and went away. But the next morning, when he spoke to his wife and she answered him, there leaped out of her mouth at every word a toad instead of a piece of gold. The king was troubled and asked why this should be so, for formerly gold had fallen from her lips. The old woman replied that it was because of her great weakness after childbirth, and that it would soon pass away. Though the king was uneasy, he believed her words and said no more. But in the night, the kitchen boy who slept by the hearth saw something strange. There came swimming up the gutter something that looked like a duck, and it said, "My king, what mock'st thou? Sleepest thou, or walk'st thou?" But there was no answer, for the king slept soundly. Then it asked, "What cheer my two guests keep they?" And the kitchen boy answered, "In bed all soundly sleep they." It asked again, "And my little baby, how does he? He sleeps in his cradle quietly," answered the boy. Then the duck came into the chamber, took the child gently from his cradle, gave him to drink, smoothed his little bed, and laid him down again. After that it swam back down the gutter and vanished. On the second night the same thing happened, and on the third night the duck said to the kitchen boy, "Go and tell the king to brandish his sword 3 times over me on the threshold." The boy ran to the king and told him all he had seen and heard. The king arose at once, took his sword, and went to the threshold. There he brandished the sword 3 times over the duck, and at the third time the duck was changed, and the queen stood before him, living and sound, as she had been before. The king rejoiced greatly, but he hid the queen in a chamber and bade her remain there until Sunday, when the child was to be baptized. When the day came and the baptism was over, the king gathered the court together and asked, "What does that person deserve who drags another out of bed and throws him into the water?" The old woman answered without hesitation, "No better fate than to be put into a cask with iron nails in it and to be rolled down the hill into the water." "Thou hast spoken thy own sentence," said the king. Then he ordered a cask to be brought. The old woman and her daughter were put into it, the lid was hammered down, and the cask was rolled down the hill into the river. Thus they came to their end, as wickedness ever must. But the queen lived long and happily with the king, and her son grew up in health and honor. And so the blessings of the 3 little men in the wood were fulfilled to the end. Iron John. There was once a king who had a great forest near his palace full of all kinds of wild animals. It stretched far and wide, dark and tangled, and no path ran straight through it. The trees stood so thick that even at midday the light scarcely reached the ground, and strange sounds were often heard coming from its depths. Yet the king had long hunted there without fear, for his huntsman knew the forest well, and game was plentiful. One day the king sent out a huntsman to shoot him a roe, but the man did not return. When evening came and the horns were silent, the king said, "Perhaps some accident has befallen him." On the next day, he sent out 2 more huntsmen to search for the first, but they too stayed away, and no sign of them was seen again. Then fear began to stir, though none yet spoke of it openly. On the 3rd day, the king summoned all his huntsmen and said, "Scour the whole forest through, and do not give up until ye have found all 3. They went out with their hounds, but none of them came back, and of the dogs also, not one was ever seen again. From that time forth, no one would venture into the forest. It lay there in deep stillness and solitude, as though something within it watched and waited. Only at times an eagle or a hawk might be seen flying over it, and even these did not linger long. Thus many years passed. Grass grew over old tracks, and the forest became a thing spoken of in whispers. At last, a strange huntsman appeared at the king's court and offered his service. He was a tall man, grave and fearless in bearing, and he said he wished to go into the dangerous forest. The king shook his head. "It is not safe there," said he. "I fear it would fare with thee no better than with the others, and thou wouldst never come out again." But the huntsman answered calmly, "Lord, I will venture it at my own risk. Of fear I know nothing." Seeing that the man would not be turned aside, the king let him go. The huntsman took his dog and entered the forest. He had not gone far when the dog scented game and rushed forward. Suddenly, it stopped short before a deep pool and could go no farther. At that moment, a naked arm stretched itself out of the water, seized the dog, and drew it under. When the huntsman saw this, he did not flee, but went back to the castle and returned with 3 men carrying buckets. They set to work and bailed out the water until the bottom was laid bare. There, crouching in the mud, lay a wild man whose body was brown like rusty iron and whose hair hung over his face down to his knees. He looked neither to the right nor the left, but stared before him with wild, unblinking eyes. They bound him with cords and led him away to the castle. Great was the astonishment of all who saw him, but the king ordered that the wild man be put in an iron cage in the courtyard, and he forbade the door to be opened on pain of death. The queen herself took the key into her keeping. From that time forth, everyone could again go into the forest in safety, and the terror of it seemed to have passed away. Now the king had a son of 8 years who often played in the courtyard. One day, as he was at play, his golden ball fell into the iron cage. The boy ran up and cried, "Give me my ball back." "Not till thou hast opened the door for me," answered the wild man. "No," said the boy, "I will not do that. The king has forbidden it," and he ran away. The next day he returned and asked again, but received the same answer. On the 3rd day the king had ridden out hunting, and the boy came once more. "I cannot open the door even if I wished," said he, "for I have not the key." "It lies under thy mother's pillow," said the wild man. "Thou canst get it there." The boy thought only of his ball and cast all else to the winds. He fetched the key and opened the door with difficulty, pinching his fingers as he did so. When it was open, the wild man stepped out, gave him the golden ball, and hurried away. Then fear seized the boy. "Oh, wild man," he cried, "do not go away, or I shall be beaten." The wild man turned back, took him up, set him upon his shoulder, and with hasty steps went into the forest. When the king returned and saw the empty cage, sorrow filled the court. Soon it was known that the boy was gone, and much grief reigned in the palace. Deep in the forest, the wild man set the boy down and said, "Thou wilt never see thy father and mother again, but I will keep thee with me, for thou hast set me free. If thou dost all I bid thee, thou shalt fare well." He led him deeper into the woods, where no sound of the world could be heard. There he made a bed of moss for the boy, and the child slept in the strange stillness of the forest. On the next morning, the wild man led him to a well. "Behold," said he, "the golden well is as bright and clear as crystal. Thou shalt sit beside it, and take care that nothing falls into it, or it will be polluted. I will come every evening to see if thou hast obeyed my order." The boy sat by the well and watched it. Often he saw a golden fish or a golden snake glide through the water. He sat still for a long time, until suddenly his finger hurt him so sorely that he put it into the water. He drew it out at once, but it was already gilded. In the evening, the wild man came back. "What has happened to the well?" he asked. "Nothing," said the boy, and hid his finger behind his back. But the wild man knew. "This time it may pass," said he, "but take care thou dost not again let anything go in." The next day the boy watched again. His finger hurt him, and as he passed it over his head, a hair fell into the well and became golden. Iron John returned and warned him once more. On the third day, as the boy bent down to look at his reflection, his hair slipped into the water, and all of it turned to gold and shone like the sun. The moment the boy raised himself from the well, he knew what had happened. The surface of the water still shone quietly, but his hair, which had slipped into it, was now wholly golden and gleamed like the sun. Terror seized him, and his heart beat violently. He tore his pocket handkerchief from his coat and bound it tightly about his head, hoping to hide what could not be undone. When Iron John came in the evening, he did not need to ask what had happened. His eyes rested on the boy, and they saw through the cloth as though it were not there. "Take the handkerchief off," he said. The boy obeyed, though his hands trembled. The golden hair streamed down over his shoulders, bright and unmistakable. The boy tried to excuse himself, but his words were of no avail. "Thou hast not stood the trial," said Iron John gravely. "Thou canst remain with me no longer. Go forth into the world. There thou shalt learn what poverty is. But because thy heart is not evil, and because I mean well by thee, I grant thee this: if ever thou fallest into great need, come to the edge of the forest and call my name. Cry, 'Iron John,' and I will come to thee. My power is greater than thou thinkest, and of gold and silver I have abundance." With these words, he led the boy to the edge of the forest. There he turned back and vanished among the trees, and the boy stood alone. The king's son walked on by beaten and unbeaten paths through villages and fields until at last he reached a great city. He was weary and hungry, and his fine clothes were torn and worn. He looked for work, but no one would take him, for he had learnt nothing by which he could help himself. At length he went to the palace and asked whether they would receive him. The people at court looked at him with curiosity. They did not know what use they could make of him, but they liked his modest manner and allowed him to stay. At last the cook took him into service and bade him carry wood and water, sweep the hearth, and rake the ashes together. Once, when no one else was at hand, the cook ordered him to carry the dishes to the royal table. But the boy did not dare show his golden hair and kept his little cap firmly on his head. The king noticed this and said sternly, "When thou comest before me, thou must take thy hat off." "Ah, Lord," answered the boy, "I cannot. I have a sore place on my head." The king was displeased and summoned the cook, reproaching him for taking such a boy into service. He ordered that the lad be dismissed at once. But the cook had pity on him and arranged instead that he be sent to work with the gardener. Thus the boy labored in the garden, planting and watering, hoeing and digging, and bearing wind and rain without complaint. One hot summer day, when he was alone among the beds, the heat was so great that he took his cap off to cool his head. As the sun fell upon his hair, it glittered so brightly that the rays flashed into the chamber of the king's daughter. She rose in wonder and looked out. There she saw the gardener's boy shining like gold among the green leaves. "Boy," she cried, "bring me a wreath of flowers." He hastily put his cap back on and gathered wild field flowers, binding them together simply. As he climbed the stairs, the gardener met him and said, "How canst thou take such common flowers to the king's daughter? Go back and seek the rarest and fairest." "No," answered the boy, "the wild ones have more scent and will please her better." When he entered the chamber, the king's daughter said, "Take thy cap off. It is not seemly to keep it on in my presence." "I may not," he replied, "I have a sore head." But she caught at the cap and pulled it away. Then his golden hair streamed down, and its splendor filled the room. He turned to flee, but she held him by the arm and pressed a handful of gold ducats into his hand. He went away at once, but he cared nothing for the gold. He gave it to the gardener and said, "Give this to thy children, let them play with it." On the following day, the king's daughter again called for a wreath, and again she tried to seize his cap. Again she gave him gold, and again he would not keep it. On the third day, the same thing happened, and she could neither uncover his head nor persuade him to accept her gift. Not long after this, war broke out in the land. The king gathered his people and armed them, yet he feared, for the enemy was strong and numerous. Then the gardener's boy said, "I am grown, and I will go to the wars also. Only give me a horse." The others laughed and said, "Seek one for thyself. When we are gone, there will be one left in the stable." When they had ridden away, the boy went into the stable and found a three-legged horse, lame and limping. He mounted it and rode toward the dark forest. When he reached its edge, he cried aloud 3 times, "Iron John." At once the wild man appeared. "What dost thou desire?" he asked. "I want a strong horse," said the boy, "for I am going to the wars." "That thou shalt have," answered Iron John, "and more besides." He vanished, and soon a stable boy came forth, leading a mighty horse that snorted and reared, and behind them followed a great troop of soldiers clad in iron. The boy gave up his lame horse, mounted the strong one, and rode at the head of the troop toward the battlefield. The youth rode on at the head of the iron-clad troop, and the ground trembled beneath the hooves of the mighty horse. The iron soldiers marched behind him in close ranks, their armor flashing dull and cold, and the sound of their steps was like the rolling of distant thunder. No word was spoken among them, and yet their presence filled the air with power. When they drew near to the battlefield, the youth saw that the king's army was already hard-pressed. Many lay fallen, and the rest were wavering, driven back step by step by the enemy, who pressed on with loud cries and lifted weapons. The king himself rode among his men, striving to hold them together, but it was clear that little more was needed for them to give way entirely. Then the youth urged his horse forward. Without sounding a trumpet or giving battle cry, he led the iron troops straight against the enemy. They broke upon them like a storm, and wherever they struck, shields shattered and ranks were torn apart. The enemy, who had thought victory certain, were seized with sudden fear. They turned to flee, but the iron soldiers pursued them without mercy, and the youth rode ever at their head, swift and unyielding. The battle was decided in a short time. When the sun sank low, not a single foe remained upon the field. Yet the youth did not return to the king. He turned his horse aside and led the iron soldiers away by hidden paths back toward the forest from which they had come. When they reached its edge, he cried aloud, "Iron John!" The wild man appeared once more. "What dost thou desire?" he asked. "Take back thy horse and thy soldiers," said the youth, "and give me again my three-legged horse." Iron John nodded, and all was done as he wished. The iron troop vanished as though it had never been, and the mighty horse was led away. The youth mounted his old lame horse, which limped and stumbled as before, and rode slowly back toward the city. When the king returned in triumph to his palace, his daughter came forth to meet him and wished him joy of his victory. "I did not win it myself," said the king. "A strange knight came to my aid with a great troop of warriors. Without him, all would have been lost." The maiden asked eagerly who this knight was, but the king could give no answer. He pursued the enemy, said he and I saw him no more. She inquired also of the gardener whether his boy had been seen. The gardener smiled and said, "He has just come home on his three-legged horse, and the others have mocked him, crying, 'Here comes Hobblety-Jig again.'" They asked under what hedge he had lain sleeping while the battle was fought. The youth bore their mockery in silence. He said only, "I did the best of all, and it would have gone badly without me." At this they laughed the more and thought him foolish. Some time passed, and the king desired to learn the truth. He proclaimed a great feast, which was to last for 3 days, and he said to his daughter, "Thou shalt throw a golden apple among the knights. Perhaps the unknown hero will come, and we shall know him." When the feast was announced, the youth went secretly to the forest and called Iron John. "What dost thou desire?" asked the wild man. "That I may catch the king's daughter's golden apple," answered the youth. "It is as safe as if thou hadst it already," said Iron John. "Thou shalt also have armor and a horse fitting for the occasion." On the first day, Iron John gave him a suit of red armor and a spirited chestnut horse. Thus equipped, the youth rode to the place of the feast and took his stand among the knights. No one recognized him. The king's daughter came forth and threw the golden apple and of all who reached for it, none caught it but the Red Knight. No sooner had he the apple than he turned his horse and galloped away. On the second day, the youth returned to the forest. Iron John clothed him in white armor and gave him a white horse. Again he rode to the feast, and again he alone caught the golden apple. Once more he fled at once, and no one could overtake him. The king grew angry. "This must not be," said he. "He who catches the apple must appear before me and tell his name." He commanded that if the knight should try to escape again, they were to pursue him, and if he would not come willingly, they were to strike him down. On the third day, the youth received from Iron John a suit of black armor and a black horse. Once more he rode to the feast. The king's daughter threw the apple, and again it fell into his hand. He turned his horse to flee, but this time the king's attendants pursued him closely. One of them came so near that he struck the youth's leg with the point of his sword and wounded him. Nevertheless, the youth escaped. As he rode, the horse leapt so violently that the helmet fell from his head and his golden hair streamed out. Those who pursued him saw it shining in the light and knew that he was no common knight. They returned and told the king what they had seen. The next day the king's daughter went into the garden and asked the gardener about his boy. "He is at work as usual," answered the man. The strange fellow was at the feast too, and only came home yesterday evening. He has even shown my children 3 golden apples, which he has won. At these words, the king ordered that the youth be brought before him. He came as he was with his little cap upon his head. The king's daughter stepped forward and took it off, and his golden hair fell down upon his shoulders. All who were present were astonished at his beauty. "Art thou the knight?" asked the king, "who came each day to the feast in different colors and caught the 3 golden apples?" "Yes," answered the youth, "and here they are." He drew the apples from his pocket and returned them. "If thou desirest further proof, thou mayest see the wound which thy servants gave me, and I am also the knight who helped thee in the war." The king looked long at him and said, "If thou canst do such deeds, thou art no gardener's boy. Tell me, who is thy father?" "My father is a mighty king," answered the youth, "and gold have I in plenty." The king listened in silence, and the hall was still. At last he said, "If thy father is a mighty king, then I owe thee more than thanks. Can I do anything to please thee?" "Yes," answered the youth simply. "Give me thy daughter to wife." At these words, a murmur ran through the court. The king's daughter, who had long watched the youth with quiet certainty, laughed gently and said, "He does not stand much on ceremony. Yet I knew already by his golden hair that he was no gardener's boy." And she went up to him and kissed him openly before all. The king gave his consent without delay, and preparations for the wedding were begun at once. Messengers were sent throughout the land, and the court was filled with guests. Yet, amid all the bustle, the youth was thoughtful, and more than once his gaze wandered toward the forest that lay beyond the city. On the day of the wedding, the king and queen sat in state, and the bride and bridegroom stood before them. The youth wore no borrowed armor now, but simple garments, and his golden hair shone freely upon his shoulders. When the vows had been spoken and the feast begun, joy filled the hall and music sounded. As they sat at table, suddenly the music ceased. The doors were thrown open, and a stately king entered with a great retinue. He was tall and majestic, and his bearing was that of one long accustomed to command. His garments were rich, and yet something of the forest seemed still to cling to him. All rose in astonishment. The stranger walked straight to the bridegroom, embraced him, and said, "I am Iron John." Then all understood. He turned to the assembly and spoke, "I was once a mighty king, but by enchantment I was turned into a wild man and doomed to dwell in the forest. He whom you see before you set me free, and for that reason all the treasures I possess shall be his." At these words his attendants brought forth chests filled with gold and silver and precious things beyond counting. But Iron John did not linger long among them. Having spoken thus, he blessed the young couple, and with his retinue departed as he had come. Great was the joy of the king and queen, and greater still when messengers arrived, bringing tidings that the bridegroom's father and mother were on their way. They came soon after, and when they saw their son standing in honor and happiness, tears of gladness filled their eyes, for they had long given him up as lost. The wedding feast lasted many days. Songs were sung of the youth's deeds, of the strange knight in red, white, and black armor, and of the golden apples. Yet the bridegroom himself spoke little of these things. He knew now that each trial had led him step by step to this hour. When at last the guests departed and quiet returned, the king called his son-in-law to him and said, "Thou hast passed through much, and thou hast shown both courage and restraint. Rule with wisdom, and remember what thou hast learnt in poverty and in power alike." The youth bowed and answered, "I shall remember." Thus the king's son, who had once been a child playing with a golden ball, became a ruler, and the forest, which had once been feared, lay open again to all. Yet it was said that at times when the wind stirred the trees in a certain way, one might still hear a deep voice calling from within, and those who heard it remembered Iron John.